Hello and welcome to the Feminine Millionaire Show. I'm your host, Polly Alexander. I'm a success coach, intuitive healer, and a passionate creative. And I believe that we all have the power to manifest magic and miracles into our life. If creating success in a spiritual, feminine, and joyful way is your goal, this show is for you. You'll understand how to overcome your past, bring your soul's greatest gifts to the world, and up-level your income, impact, joy, and happiness. Let's all rise together. Welcome, Phyllis.
Thank you for having me here.
So let me tell you about some of the things that Phyllis has accomplished in her life today. And believe me, she's still going strong. She actually co-founded BLS Limousine service with her late husband almost 50 years ago. As a former social studies teacher, she quit teaching to run the office from her tiny kitchen on Long Island. The company grew to 3 offices, and after her husband's death, she and her 2 sons expanded to 11 more. BLS stands today proudly woman-owned and world-renowned. Phyllis began a writing career at 55 that has so far produced 83 books. Writing as Carol P. Roman and Brit London, she's enchanted children, parents, and teachers with several fiction and non-fiction series. Her joke book, The Big Book of Silly Jokes for Kids, shot to the top of Amazon, outselling every other book for 2 months. And when I actually checked today, it's still the #1 bestseller.
It is, yeah.
Her young adult novel, Grady Will and the Templeton Codex, is currently being turned into a screenplay. And after her husband passed, she ventured into mediumship classes, eventually being singled out of her mentorship and endorsed by seatbelt psychic Thomas John. As Lady Phyllis, her ability to connect and give evidential information has built this new venture to many monthly sessions and a steady clientele. Combining her love of teaching with her many talents, she has now opened several courses sharing her knowledge and demystifying mediumship to enable a new generation to embrace it. Phyllis's unique experiences have made her a compassionate and understanding medium, CEO, and author. She proves that you don't have to give anything up because of age. Wow, where do I start? The first thing that struck me when I started discovering you and your many facets and, your lifetime of literally productivity in so many different areas and accomplishment, I wondered, was there anything in your background and upbringing that foreshadowed your future career choices? Or was it all down to you following your passions, your opportunities?
That's a really interesting question, Polly. And I'm going to say, and I've written about this on Medium, I look back to my ancestors. So my grandmother came to this country in 1924, and she was a teacher. She was born in 1898. So the fact that she became a teacher and then her family sent her to America, where she ended up marrying my grandfather in an arranged marriage. This is what was still going on at this time in their community. She gave up teaching. She didn't speak the language. She went to night school for 2 weeks. She married a widower with 2 children so that she could take care of the kids. She owned real estate that she lost during the Depression. One of her favorite stories was she bought stock. She saved her house money and bought stock in a company called AT&T. And my grandfather said, it'll never work, that thing. And he made her sell it. So she was always this kind of inventive person. She ended up being a bookie for Dutch Schultz, the gangster, when they owned a candy store. But she used to make a lot of her own syrups, and she kept reinventing herself. Eventually, she bought a bungalow colony in Coney Island when my grandfather was ill. My mother was a full-charge bookkeeper, and she ended up helping my father with their business. He had a hardware store, and she opened up a decorating service. She had no background, but yet she loved wallpaper and colors, and she would help people pick wallpaper and design their rooms for them. Going further back, My grandmother's mother lost her husband at 28. And this is in Austria Hungary when there were no opportunities for women. And she ended up becoming a house mother in a college, a cook. So, how much opportunity was available to women, and yet she found a way to support her three children. Her mother, so this is my great great grandmother, owned an inn in Austria Hungary because there wasn't much opportunity for my ethnic group to do anything. So she owned an inn. And that was pre World War One. So I think about that and I think about, is it in the DNA? There's something in the DNA that made me want to stretch and say, I can do that or take chances. Now, my parents, I wanted to be an attorney. I have two younger brothers, and they were going to send me to college. And they said, you know what? You want to have a family, maybe not an attorney, maybe a teacher. That's a better field for you. And I agreed. I mean, we're talking about the 70s. And, I was happy that I was going to college. I finished school in 3 years to make room for my brothers because there was limited funds. There were limited funds. And I didn't want to be a burden to my parents. So I finished, I got my degree in 3 years. I started teaching, but I had met my husband, who was an immigrant and couldn't run his back office. He started to drive cars to make money for an engagement ring for me part time. And then he bought a car and he needed someone to be able to write things down for him to run the back office. So he said to me, would you quit the teaching and help me? And I said, only if we can start a family. So I did. And I dove into that. So it's kind of like, I guess I was never afraid. I guess that I got a sense of whatever I was doing, something better had to be around the corner. We were really poor. The whole family was poor. It was a struggle for my parents. It was a struggle for my grandparents. It was always a struggle. So I figured, I'll try it. And so I ordered yellow pages and I sat with yellow pages and an egg timer. And I used to cold call companies to see if I could get them to use our service. And many of the companies that are with us today, 50 years later, were from that egg timing cold call. It's a pretty amazing thing. But I learned by trying. And I think one thing about my parents, they always made me feel confident. They always made me feel there are no mistakes, there are only opportunities. Don't be afraid. And I'm really proud of that. I had no business experience other than working in my father's hardware store. I had learning disabilities. I didn't learn to tie my shoes till I was 18. I couldn't figure it out spatially. I couldn't tell time till I was 28. But that was just, it was just an inconvenience. And I found ways to compensate and get around it.
So what I hear is there's this quality of resourcefulness that seems to have travelled down your family line. I mean, there were some extraordinary women in that line who were complete rule breakers and pioneers for their time and their circumstances.
They really were. And the one thing that I will say about them is that they did it within the confines, other than my grandmother's short time with Dutch Schultz, the gangster, which she really didn't have I don't think there was much of a choice there. They learned to do it within the confines and restrictions that society had given them. There were no rule breakers, but they were definitely glass ceiling climbers, and they got around it rather than break through it. I'm really proud of the people in my family. My father was in concentration camp. So he lost everything. He lost his parents, his sisters, and the one theme that I understood. So I consider myself a survivor because I'm a survivor's daughter. My husband was also, his parents were survivors as well. So the one thing that has remained a focus in our life was you have to go through it, whatever it is. I remember my father, when he was interviewed for the Shoah, what did you learn in this life? And he said, I learned hope, that whatever your circumstances were, there was a way through it. And so I think between my mother, who had this great line of females who had this kind of, they weren't going to give up, they were going to stick with it. And then my father, who was a survivor, I think it was the perfect role models for me. And I will tell you that I have earned the nickname of the tank and that I never give up. And if I can't do it, I'm going to figure it out. And, we've had a roller coaster of a life with business, between, all the different things that are going on, what's going on now with the economy. I don't have to spell it out. Like things are changing. There's always, to me, this tunnel that we have to get through it, because I always see the light at that end of the tunnel.
What a powerful quality. I used to have an English bulldog called Lolo, and whenever I would play tug of war with Lolo, he would never let go. He won every single time. And whenever we talk about this determination, this resilience, I always think of Lolo that just wouldn't let go. And there's this real strength and resourcefulness in you that I understand has served you very, very well. Let's dive a little bit more into your first business journey. Were you a high achiever as a child? You mentioned that you had learning difficulties and you didn't tie your shoes or learn to tell the time until later. Were you high achieving in other ways, or did you blossom as an adult?
I never competed with other people. I didn't like competition. I didn't want to do the sports, but I was very competitive with myself. Like, for instance, one year I went to the I walked to the library. I was maybe 11 or 12 years old, and I'd walk a mile to the library, and I read every book there was on dream interpretation, because that was what I was interested. One year I taught myself how to play the guitar. I literally said, one year I taught myself another language. I sat down with books and I taught myself. When I think about it, I was junior class president. I kind of forgot about that. I was also, in my senior year, I was the vice president of the school. When I ran, the other kids dropped out, and I was elected unanimously by 5,000 students because I got things done. I created programs in the school that helped tutor younger kids. To me, I was always solution oriented. So we created the Martin Luther King Day Luncheon. We just did things, you know, when faced with issues, I always said there has to be a way out of it. So I would always look for a solution. I mean, I forgot about these stories, but they're just coming back to me now. For instance, I studied with Luigi. I was a dancer. I studied dancing for about 10 years when I was a kid. And I used to go into the city to study at the New York, at the ABT. We would take lessons. I was $25. It was a huge sum of money, but my parents scraped it together because I loved it. And if you had a passion, they fed it. So I used to study jazz with Luigi, who's very famous. And I was a little girl. I was awkward. I didn't know my right from my left. I could never, to this day, I have to carry a big diamond ring to make sure I know which one is the right hand. But I would follow and do whatever he did. Now, all of Broadway was practicing with him. All the dancers who worked on Broadway would take classes, and I was there with my older cousin. And Luigi, he was passionate. He was like the Bob Fosse of his time. And he was doing it, and he's like yelling out the things. And all of a sudden he screams, "Stop!" And he starts yelling at them. And he pulls me by my hand in front and holds me up. And he says, "This child is more dedicated than any of you." And that kind of stayed with me. And then he made me dance next to him. And I was such an awkward little, kind of chubby little girl. Maybe I was 12 years old. But I understood that if you gave your heart to something, you didn't have to be perfect. You didn't have to fit the mold. As long as you gave your heart and gave it 110%, that's what counted. And so I guess my whole life I've always been, but it's never been about money. It's never been to get ahead. It was just to do the best that I could do. There's another story that kind of, I guess, played into that. I was in seventh grade English, and I was watching the clock on the wall. I was bored. And I remember watching the time pass. And I realized that 15 minutes of my life had passed that I would never see again. And I realized I had two aunts. One was 20, one was 13, that were murdered during the war. And they would never get that opportunity that I was being given. And I decided at that moment I would not waste 1 minute of my time again, that I would make it count for those two girls who didn't get their time here. And I would make it count for me. So I value my time. Let's put it that way. I value every minute of every day.
Mm. And talking about making the most of your time, how did you manage to juggle it all? A marriage, being a mother, work, this fast growing business at this stage?
You cut away a lot of the garbage. What do we spend a lot of our time? We worry. I stopped worrying. I wrote an article about time suckers. What's the time suckers? People that didn't add value to my life, or that I wasn't giving them value. I kind of didn't, spend time on those things. So maybe the underwear wasn't as white as it should be either. Maybe clothing was a little wrinkled. Like I said, I didn't have time to put on makeup today. Well, that's because I've been up since 6 o'clock. I was in the office. There were two meetings there. There was a meeting I ran home for here. I managed to get to the bank in between, every minute of my day. But I do watch junk TV, and that's for me because you cannot operate from an empty cup. You can't pour tea from an empty cup. I laugh, I do yoga, I feed my silly soul as well as my serious soul. But I try not to waste it on things that are not going to enhance me or the people around me.
Yeah, so you're very intentional about how you
Yeah.
use time. Even if you're watching some junk reality TV, it's purposeful. It's not numbing out or because you're bored or because you haven't got anything better to do. It's because it's bringing you joy or pleasure.
Well, that's how the mediumship started, basically, because my husband and I were together for 48 years, every single day, all day, because we worked together. And then he got sick. He had lung cancer. He and my mother got lung cancer within 2 months of each other. She was terminal, and we never knew if he was going to make it. She died within 2 years. I took care of both of them. He lived 15 years. He was the longest survivor in his group. They were very impressed with him, but eventually it came back. But our life changed. We were a power couple. When he couldn't keep up. I made my life smaller, and I used that time to write. What happened was we fell into a little bit of a depression when my mom passed. She was my best friend. We spent a lot of time together. I would bounce things off of her. We read together. I would read a book. She would read it. We would discuss it. We had a really rich relationship. And when she died, I had never experienced depression, but that kind of got me. So my sons said to me, write a book. And I wrote the very first book. And what happened was it was named to Kirkus's Best for 2012, which was astonishing for, a novice writer. CreateSpace called me and said they couldn't believe it. Then another one of my books was named to Kirkus's Best. So my husband said, you were meant to do this, so write it, do it. So I just started writing, and that's how the writing began. But what I'm saying is, I think that out of bad things, good things happen. So when my husband passed, I found long stretches of boredom because I didn't know what to do with myself. He was always there since I was 16. We were together. And that's when I started taking mediumship courses because otherwise, those long stretches of boredom turned into panic and pity. And it's like putting on a pair of shoes that are uncomfortable. It didn't feel good. I didn't like that feeling. So I had to find a way out of it. And what gave me peace, I had always gone to mediums, but taking the courses really changed my life.
Mm. First, can I just circle back to the writing? You have been so prolific. You have published 83 books, which blows my mind. Did the writing come naturally? Like, what was the motivation for this?
Well, when my sons told me write the book, what are you going to write overnight? We had a contest. Everybody had to bring in something. So I wrote about playtime with my grandson. We played imaginary games. We would go dive under the sea or go to outer space, whatever it was. So I wrote Captain Nobeard, which is about a boy who's a pirate. And the whole story is he's a pirate, and his cousin Hallie, which was my other granddaughter, Alexander, was Captain Nobeard. These are my two grandchildren at the time. And what happens is at the end of the book is you find out that they're in his bedroom and it's all imaginary, that they're using their imagination to have all this fun. So I wrote the book literally in 10 minutes because it was based on playtime. I dedicated that to Alex. I had to write a book for Hallie. So, and then subsequently, as each grandchild came along, they needed their own book. So I added Kayla and Zachary. So I would like find a story. They were usually based on things that were happening in the day. I was driving in, I saw a beautiful sunrise. So I remembered that old saying, sunrise in the morning, the sailor's warning. So I would find a story around it, or I had buried treasure, or something would happen. My grandson wanted to steal the aurora borealis. I wrote a story about it. So I was writing stories, but we had homes in Vegas. We were opening up in Vegas. And I took him for a walk on the strip, and he saw the Eiffel Tower. He was 4 years old. And he said, "What's that?" And how do you explain the Eiffel Tower? What's the Eiffel Tower? Like, how do you explain it? And so that weekend, I went home and wrote 5 books called If You Were Me and Lived In. And they are nonfiction. And what they were 10 things for a child between the age of 4 to 8, 10 things to identify culture and customs of country, what your name would be, what you would call your mom, what you would call your dad, what kind of food would you eat. And it got embraced by homeschoolers. So the books became kind of bestsellers. And then they urged me to write for older children. So I sat down and wrote 10 books on historical time periods. I picked only what interested me, you know. I wrote 4 books, 5 books in one weekend, and I would sit with the formula and write them. Then, as the kids got into chapter books, I wrote Ode Susanna because I was reading chapter books with them. So I wrote Oh, Susanna. And then my last one was Grady Will and the Templeton Codex. That's the one that's being turned into a screenplay, and we'll see what's going to happen with it. But this book is about, I have a granddaughter who has certain challenges, like me, and she's had to learn a little differently. Let's say she's rewired differently from other kids. And so, what this book is about is kids with challenges ending up going to a superhero high school and learning that those challenges are actually their superpowers. And I love that book.
So your creativity is coming partly from real life, partly prompted by your family relationships and what you can give to your individual family members. Sometimes it's when somebody asks you to create. It feels like sometimes you're responding to things you've seen in the world. It feels like a mixture of different things. And what I'm hearing is you're so productive. You mentioned writing 5 books in a weekend. Can you share some tips for productivity?
Well, the first thing is, if you're going to do that, set aside time and sit down and just do it. And don't get stopped by imperfection. There are people for that. You get an editor, or you ask a friend to beta read if there's or you ask your mom to beta read, like my son does. So the biggest thing that stops people is distractions, or they get afraid that it's not going to be perfect. So stop. I don't worry about perfection. Like I said, underwear isn't so white. There's a great thing for having, colorful underwear. So put your priority on getting it done, and I have a unique ability that I can be distracted and still go right back to it. For instance, I wrote several of my books in the office. I share an office with my brother. Now he's completely blind. He's the CFO of our companies. I have 17 corporations. He's CFO of all my corporations. But I'm in his office so I can help him see. And very often, he doesn't realize that I'm writing, and he'll talk to me, and I'm able to talk to him and continue writing without stopping. It's just an ability that I have. I guess maybe motherhood, that I was able to run a business from my kitchen for 10, 12 years while having kids all over the place, throwing their guts up or pooping in a diaper. And I would be on the phone with various celebrities and tell them, hold on, my hands are full of shit, quite simply. And they would laugh, and they had the patience. I find that if you're honest, people love it. And I think that my candor has gotten me further than hiding things. So as far as, that's the biggest thing. If you're going to do it, do it. Don't say you have an issue, you got a stomach. It's the same thing. My kids always knew that they walked in the house, they had to sit down and do their homework right away. That's a rule. My grandchildren are the same way. They walk in the house, they sit down, get it done, get those things done. So my sons run the business the same way. They don't put things off. Procrastination is the enemy, I think.
So this real focus on getting it done. And I think that's quite an unusual ability to get distracted and immediately reconnect back with what you're doing, because a lot of the studies out there say that it takes you 20 minutes to get back in the zone, but you have the ability to go out of the zone and straight back into it.
When I dispatched, I used to dispatch from the house. I had 17 cars at one point, and I was doing all the dispatching in New York. That was when we were just in New York. I had little children. I had to feed them. I had to make dinner. The calls were coming in. I was taking reservations. I didn't have a staff then. It was just me. And my mom would come at night and take them and give a bath while I was continuing to work, because I had to set up schedules. So I was in and out constantly. So maybe it's about training. Maybe it's about discipline and training.
It's like life trained you. Your life trained you for the job, and you were willing. You were willing and available.
Yeah, I never cared. I was happy that I had anything to do. So I was delighted to be able to help my husband build the business. It was always his. And I was so excited to see him live that dream. It was a pleasure. You
Mm.
know, he was giving me mine, which was being home with my kids. There's a story that one of the studio execs, I was on the phone with her. She was head of production at a major studio. And she said, "Oh, Phyllis, we were talking about you the other day. We couldn't believe everything you achieved." And I said, "Yeah, the kids came out great." And it was dead silence on the phone. I mean, dead silence. She says, "We're talking about your business." And it was like, "Oh, yeah, right. That's doing good too." Because my priority was always the kid. I was just so happy, with everything I did, but that was really the most important thing for me.
Mm. Let's talk about your pivot into mediumship. How did that come about?
Well, we went to mediums for years. I think my first mediumship experience was when I was 31. Somebody had gone to a world famous medium and said that they mentioned my husband David's name. And would I be interested? So my mother and I called. I'd never been to a medium before. And it was life changing. And after that, we started going to lots of mediums just to compare and see what kind of information you get. And my father passed, and then unfortunately, my mom passed, my grandmother passed, my mother-in-law passed. We were able to go and get messages from all of them. So when my husband passed, I was going to medium after medium, like once a week. I was looking for any kind of message from him. I missed him so much. He had cheated death so many times that when he actually passed, it was kind of like, what, really? You know, what do you
Mm.
mean? So I was going a lot. Well, I went to a Ronald McDonald House event, and I went to three mediums, and all of them said they are insisted that you do this. And the last one said they're telling me I have to teach you. So he started teaching me through FaceTime. And we got maybe 8 or 9 lessons in. And it's like once you see it, you don't unsee it. So I was beginning to get it, and then COVID happened. It became the pandemic. So what took us 50 years to build took 2 weeks to unravel because nobody traveled. So I had all these cities. I had 750 employees. I had cars, and nobody's using them. But you still have you have payments. There's insurance. There's salaries, and we didn't. We kept saying it's going to be 2 weeks, 2 weeks. So I was running the bit, and of course, now my kids who live a quarter mile in one direction, a quarter mile in the other direction, I can't even see my children. I'm alone in a house, and it was horrifying, because I didn't know what tomorrow's going to. And we own properties. There were mortgages. It was just life. That stuff didn't stop. So
Mm.
we had to figure out something, and we got it figured out. We went down to 35 employees. We kept the business intact, but there were stretches of hours that I was alone in the house. So I started Googling mediumship courses, and I just started taking, I don't waste time. I was working on Grady Will. I was working on multiple books, you know, and, part of the day I learned how to tap dance. That was, I relearned. I hadn't tap danced in maybe 48 years. I bought myself a block of wood, and I pulled out my old tap shoes, and I put on Bruno Mars, and I was tap dancing to Uptown Funk. So I was teaching myself for hours how to do the steps. And at night I took mediumship courses. Well, out of 86 students in Thomas John's class, he only endorsed me. So my sons had a podcast. They went into a podcast direction where they were getting on and talking about business, and they interviewed a lot of mediums, and they invited me on. They said, "Mom, come on." Now I'd been on, because we talked about business. And I went on, and they go, "Okay, Mom, we've got guests here. Go ahead and read them." And I was like, "What? No." But I went, I did it. And the next day, my daughter-in-law, they had bought me 1 square inch of Scotland. So I became Lady Phyllis. And my daughter-in-law said, "Let's use Lady Phyllis." And I always wanted to be a lady. So my other son designed the website, and we started a Facebook page, and, I started talking about mediumship. And the next thing I knew, I was booked up every month between 20, 30, 40 readings a month. And then somebody approached me and said, "You've got to teach." And I said, "No, I don't have the time." And she says, "Phyllis, you're teaching people." And she said, "You're teaching anyway. Make classes, people will come." So I did, and it started with level one, and then they didn't want to stop. So I did level two, and then I did level three. And they said, "No, no, no, you can't stop." I said, "I have nothing left to teach you." And they said, "We don't want you to stop." So I set up a Patreon, and we meet once a month, and I bring in guests to inform them about all the different things that are available to them as mediums.
Mm. So, just for people listening who may be new to mediumship, can you explain what it is and what the benefits are?
Okay, like you mentioned, you had brought up psychics and mediums. Like people think it's the same thing. It's not. It's very different. A psychic can talk about the past, the present, the future. They kind of tune in. They raise their vibration and tune into the universe, and they pick up information not publicly known. Not that they know it, but they pick information up. A medium connects directly with the other side. For instance, when I do a reading, I sort of look at a person and I kind of feel, if behind them, if they've got someone who's passed that's behind them, if it's contemporary, it would be to the sides of them. So you basically sort of raise your vibration, plug in, and all of a sudden you start getting images. And what I learned was this was a huge thing. I learned that we have various ways that we're getting this information. Everybody's heard of clairvoyance, right? But did you know there's like five others or eight other kind of clairs? There's clairaudient, there's clairgustience, there's clairsentience, there's claircognizant. So you're receiving information. There's nothing, I'm not gifted, and this is what I tell people, I am not gifted. There are gifted mediums who understand how to relay that information, but everybody is getting information all the time. For instance, if you constantly see 222, that's clairvoyance. You're seeing that number. It doesn't have to be in your head. You could be seeing that. Or if your eyes fall on something and it makes you think of something, that's clairvoyance too. Like sometimes you hear that voice in your head. That's your spirit guide, or that's a connection. And that information is coming to you from the other side. So people are receiving messages all the time. They're just not recognizing them. We've all heard of train of thought, right? Train of thought. We have a train of thought. So we all think that you have to like go into some kind of trance to do this, or you feel that you have to shut out all the noise. It's not like you can't. Like you asked me, how am I able to do these things with all the things coming at me? It's the same thing. You're always going to be thinking. We're addicted to thinking. So what happens is you have to learn how to slow your thoughts. And when you get that train of thought, you look in between the train, in between the cars, and you go, strawberries and cream. That's me. I was just thinking of that. Oh, yeah, I was thinking I have to call my mother. Oh, I was thinking I have, to get my hair done, I have to make the appointment. Wait a minute, that doesn't belong to me. That teddy bear isn't mine. Who does that belong to? So that's how it works. It's just a matter of slowing your thoughts enough to see what's coming in and going, wait a second, that's not me. That's for you. And that's the simple secret of mediumship. And, sometimes we get that aha moment, where you're saying, I don't have a solution. I need a solution. You get all of a sudden it comes to you. Does it ever occur how it's coming to you? Maybe it's coming from your spirit guide, or maybe it's coming from your dad who's on the other side who's saying, right here, do this. You know, maybe it's coming from an outside source. We're so conditioned to think that we're all it. We don't realize there's something much bigger going on.
It's my personal belief that our relationship with people continues past death and it continues to evolve, that it doesn't just end at that point. What's your perspective on that?
There's a lot of grief. When I do these readings, I seem to attract a certain group of people that are suffering loss. And I understand grief because I miss my people
Mhm.
deeply. And what I've learned is they always ask me, do they miss me? And what I've learned is no, they don't, because they're with you, you know? And if you can push through that grief, if you can suspend the grief for a minute and understand and look for the signs, you'll miss them less too because you'll feel them.
Do you ever actively ask relatives that have passed for advice or support?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I look for the signs. I'll hear a song come on, something will happen. I'll get a phone call, somebody says something. If you look for the signs, they are there, but you got to look for them.
For people listening, can you give some examples of what the signs might look like? You've just mentioned hearing a song on the radio, seeing the repeated numbers. I know I see white feathers a lot when I go out on walks.
When my father passed, we saw a lot of feathers, and I never put it together. And then we started saying, oh, the feathers are from, my dad. I was driving my nephew home one day, and he said, why does, he called him Zadie, why does Zadie always send you feathers? He was 8 years old. He says, I never get a feather. And I go, because you're not looking for it, Matt. And I brought him to my house. We walked in the back door, and there's no way this happened. All of a sudden, on the floor of my kitchen, we walked in the house. There's a white feather this big. So, it's like, how did that get into the house? And I mean, I'm not talking about a little feather. I'm talking about a feather this big on the floor in the house. So when my mom was dying and she was in a comatose kind of state, they had already started administering the drugs to help ease her breathing. And like I said, she was at end stage lung cancer. I picked her up and I said, Mom, we got to know that you're going to get there all right. Got to know you see Dad all right. I said, I'm going to ask you to give me something, a sign. You got to send a feather, but we don't want to confuse you with Dad. Make it a red feather. Well, within 3 days, my sister in law called me up and she's total skeptic, screaming. I found a red feather underneath the dog's butt. The dog sat down. She moved the dog and there was a red feather there. And she came running over with the red feather. When David was the last day of his life, Michael, my son, put $100 bill in his hand. He said, Dad, when you get to the other side, let us know and send me a sign. 100 is our sign. Doesn't have to be a dollar bill, but 100 is our sign. And he put the 100 in his hand to validate it. Next day, we were going to the funeral home to make arrangements. And my son calls me up screaming. They took a picture of the car in front of him. Now I live in a tiny town. We know everybody here. We know the cars. We know it's a small town. So the car was my husband's initials with 100.
Wow, that gives me
Right.
chills.
It gives me chills too. But if you ask for signs, you will get them. When I was picking my younger son, Eric, I was helping them pick a venue for their wedding. And I would do that with my mom. And she wasn't here. And I said, Mom, show me a sign that this is the place. And all of a sudden, a song comes on, I Love Paris in the Morning. Now, that's not a common song, but that was my mother's song. She used to sing that to us when we were in the bathtub. She used to substitute our names. I love Phyllis in the morning. I love Kevin at the night. I love Stuart. And she would sing to all of us that song. That was her song. Now, I don't know the last time I've ever heard that song on the radio, but that song came on. That's a sign. So you
Mm.
have signs, you'll get them.
Yeah, I love that. Ask for signs. I think that's the piece that many people are missing, the
Mhm.
actually asking. And then, as you said, being alert, like looking for them and being receptive and slowing down enough that you're aware.
Right.
So, we're going to put a link in the show notes to how people can book a reading with you or learn mediumship from you. I know that you have the courses available now as well. And I'm curious as we wrap up, where's the unexplored territory for you in this chapter of life? Because it strikes me that you're continually growing, you're continually curious, you're so committed to creating and also mastering new areas. What seas are left to sail?
You know what? I kind of make it up as I go along. Isn't that the fun part? I think that if you set a goal and you don't make it, there's disappointment. And disappointment's like that ill fitting shoe. I don't like the feeling of that. So I kind of like discovery better. But the point is, I think I'd rather be surprised by where it takes me. I think that's more fun. Like, who would have thought 2 years ago that I'd be doing this, being interviewed by you, Polly? Who would have thought? I've met the most fascinating people doing this. And not only that, I have a network, a new family of people that are so interested. And I'm meeting more people every day. So exciting.
Yeah, I actually had a question which I was going to ask you, and you've actually answered without me having to ask the question. The question was, did you lead life or did life lead you? And I'm hearing that life led you and you responded.
Yeah, I always tell people, I say, let go and float and see where it takes you. I'd rather live life on that roller coaster than the merry-go-round.
Mm. I'm going to wrap up with one final question I like to ask all my guests, and that is, what is true abundance for you?
True abundance is health and being with my children and my grandchildren, my brothers, their extended families, the extended family that I'm creating between my business and the mediumship and the books. It's, to me, that's true abundance. It's being relevant. I don't want to close my life. I want to grow my life.
Mm.
And we've had our number of challenges, for my day job. It's been really hard, but I embrace every day knowing, confident that the universe has great things for us in store and that everything's a life lesson and it's worthwhile.
So powerful. I think it's really, really demonstrated through your whole life how much you're willing to trust and how much you're willing to explore and listen and respond to life. And it's incredible the success that you've created through being willing and determined and listening and creating. You're just a tremendous creative. Incredible. Thank you so much for being in conversation with me. It's been so inspiring and so fascinating. And just for people listening, you are about to hit 70, is that right?
In September, I turned 70, right? And like I said before, my uncle always said, if you didn't know how old you are, how old would you be? And I definitely don't feel 70. So I'm really excited. I can't believe that number is here.
Right. Yeah, I know that feeling when you feel like it's a mismatch between the age on your birth certificate and how you feel and where you're at in your life. I know that we could be back here again in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, and you'll have some more chapters to share with me. It really feels like you are in your prime, and it's been really exciting to be in your energy with you at this stage of life.
Thank you, Polly. I feel the same way. You are a wonderful interviewer.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
What a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And you can book a mediumship session with Phyllis using her website link in the show notes. Now, I'm excited that I'm going to be beginning the In Full Bloom journey very soon. This is your last chance to join me. You can go to bloom.pollyalexander.com to find out more. It is a live journey for women in midlife and beyond to raise your energy and optimize your radiance. You're going to walk away feeling excited and energized about your life and future, and clear on what's important to you right now and how to create your life around it. I'm going to be sharing tons of health hacks that I have learned and that are keeping me in high energy as I grow older. And we're also going to be diving deep into really owning the wisdom of this time of life, owning your radiance, owning your power. It's going to be an amazing journey. And if you're called, I know that you're going to really benefit from allowing yourself to be supported at this stage in life, because this will be a nurturing and nourishing journey. So I look forward to seeing those of you that say yes, and I wish you all a radiant and abundant week. Bye for now.